I heard the way he spoke to my daughter when he thought I couldn't hear. My name is Raymond Ellis, and what you're about to hear is the story of how my son-in-law tried to steal our family business, and how I made sure he never saw me coming. Sit back and let me tell you how I went from being pushed out of my own legacy to showing everyone who really built it all. Before we get too far, don't forget to subscribe and let me know where you're listening from. It started small, like all poison does. Just a whisper behind a closed door, a missing receipt, a new lock on a storeroom that used to be open to everyone. Our bakery, Ellis & Son, stood on the corner of Maple and Fifth for almost 50 years. I built it with my hands, sweat, and more sleepless nights than I can count. Even after my wife passed, I never closed up early, never cut corners, never let a single customer walk out hungry. I was proud. Not of the money or the plaques or even the little write-up in the city paper years back. I was proud that when I walked down the street, people smiled at me. Kids waved. The regulars called me by name. It meant something. Then Olivia married Mark. He was all charm and big ideas at first. Showed up with new marketing plans, talk about franchising, even fancy new uniforms with his own logo stitched in the collar. I tried to keep an open mind. Times change, and maybe the old ways needed a little shaking up. Olivia was happy. I wanted her to stay that way. But it wasn't long before the smiles got thinner, and I started feeling like a guest in my own shop. Mark began managing the books. For efficiency, he hired his cousin as assistant manager, and soon after, 3 more of his own people filled the morning shifts. The regular staff I'd had for years, Marta, Ed, and sweet old Mrs. Patel, were quietly given fewer hours, then no shifts at all. They came to me, eyes worried, asking what was going on. I told them it was just a phase, that we were growing, that Mark knew what he was doing. I was lying. To them. To myself. By summer, Mark insisted I take more time for myself. Said I should enjoy my golden years. He changed the locks, just for security. He even moved my favorite mug out of the office. I came in one morning and found my desk cleared. Old invoices, family photos, even my battered recipe notebook. Gone. Oh, I moved it somewhere safe, he said with that too bright smile. My daughter started looking tired. She'd come in early, leave late, eyes red from crying or not sleeping. Every time I asked, she'd just say she was fine. That Mark was stressed. The business was just in a transition period. But I could see the truth. She was as trapped as I was. I tried to talk to Mark once. Late at night, after the shop had closed, while Olivia was in the back counting the register. I told him the bakery was never meant to be a gold mine. It was meant to be a home. He just laughed. Times change, Ray, he said, leaning back in my chair. You want to keep up, you get out of the way. Let me make this place what it could be. He paused, then added, or you could just retire, enjoy whatever's left. That was when I knew. He didn't just want to run the place. He wanted me gone. If you think that was the worst part, you're not even close. I didn't retire. I didn't leave. I showed up every morning before sunrise, the same as always. I baked, swept, served the first regulars with their coffee, and pretended not to notice Mark's new rules posted on the wall. I smiled at his cousin, even when he tried to correct me on how to knead dough, a kid who never worked a real day in his life. The regulars noticed the changes too. People started to whisper, wondering what was happening to the old place. Some stopped coming altogether. That hurt more than anything Mark did. Olivia tried to bridge the gap, bless her. She'd make excuses for Mark, bring me little pastries she'd tried at home, talk about expanding, franchising, building a future for our family. I saw the hope in her eyes and the fear behind it. I couldn't push her, I just hugged her tight and said everything would be fine. Summer turned to fall. Mark's grip got tighter. I noticed money missing from the till, orders going out to vendors I'd never heard of, expensive new equipment delivered without anyone asking me. When I questioned him, Mark brushed me off. It's all in the plan, Ray. Don't worry about the details. But I did worry. I lost sleep, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd let everything slip away. I reached out to Marta and Ed, the staff Mark had let go. We met for coffee one Sunday morning, like old times. Marta was angry. Ed was sad. Both of them missed the bakery, missed the sense of family we'd built. I told them I was trying to figure things out, that I needed their help, keeping an eye on things. They agreed. Loyalty runs deep in people who've struggled together. One rainy night, as I was closing up, I heard Mark arguing on the phone in my office. He was talking numbers, deadlines, investors. I caught something about full ownership and pushing the old man out for good. My blood ran cold. That night I started keeping a notebook of everything Mark did. New hires, money movements, weird invoices, changes in the schedule. I logged every late-night phone call, every time he sent Olivia home early. I also started making calls. Old customers, friends from the neighborhood, even a lawyer I'd once helped out with a wedding cake. Quietly, I gathered information. I learned Mark had filed paperwork with the city, naming himself as managing partner. He was working to change the ownership structure, pushing Olivia to sign things she didn't understand. He was moving fast. I knew I couldn't confront him directly. He was too slick, too good at twisting things around. So I played along. I pretended to be tired, grateful, ready to step back. I let Mark think he was winning. He even started leaving me out of meetings, which gave me time to dig deeper. Olivia, meanwhile, grew more distant. I saw bruises on her arms one morning, and she flinched when Mark raised his voice in the kitchen. That was the day my patience snapped. I called Marta, Ed, and Mrs. Patel. I asked them to meet me at the bakery after closing. When we gathered that night, I told them everything. Mark's plans, the missing money, the threats. They listened in silence, then nodded. They wanted to help. We agreed to keep watch, report anything suspicious, and most of all, support Olivia however we could. I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. But Mark was getting bolder. He started hosting late-night meetings with strangers, locking the office door, sending Olivia home early on purpose. Sometimes I'd hear laughter or shouting or the clink of glasses. The bakery I'd built was turning into a place I didn't recognize. Still, I waited. I watched. I wrote everything down. The city's autumn festival was coming up, a huge event for local businesses. Mark planned a big promotion. Balloons, banners, half off everything. He wanted to make a splash, as he put it, and prove to the town that he was the real heart of Ellis & Son. He didn't ask my opinion. He barely spoke to me at all. That night, after another argument with Mark, I sat in my car outside the bakery and wondered if I should just let go. Maybe it was time. Maybe I'd done enough. But then I remembered my wife's words years ago when we first opened. You don't quit on family, even when it hurts. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I wrote a letter to myself. A promise that I'd fight for what mattered. For the people who stood by me, for Olivia, for the little shop that had meant so much to so many. That was just the beginning of my silence turning into strategy. The autumn festival arrived with a gray sky and a crisp wind that smelled of cinnamon and leaves. The street outside the bakery buzzed with music and laughter. Mark had spared no expense. Bright signs, a tent outside, 2 hired college kids passing out samples and matching T-shirts with his logo. I stood by the door, shaking hands and smiling for the crowd, but inside I felt invisible. The regulars noticed. Some squeezed my shoulder. Others offered quiet words. Still the best bread in town, Ray. Or, don't let 'em push you out. I nodded and thanked them, holding back the ache in my chest. Olivia worked the register with shaky hands, her eyes darting to Mark every few minutes. He barked orders, posed for photos, gave interviews to a reporter from the local paper. When he wrapped his arm around Olivia for a picture, she stiffened. No one but me seemed to see it. Late that afternoon, as the festival was winding down, Mark called a meeting in the back room. He asked everyone, staff, family, even his cousin, to sit down. I have an announcement, he said, loud and confident, his eyes on me. He held up a folder. As of today, I'm taking over as managing partner. Olivia and I have signed the paperwork. We're expanding, franchising, bringing Ellis & Son into a new era. He smiled at the room, but it was empty. No joy, just cold triumph. I saw Olivia looking at her lap, her hands clenched tight. For a second, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Mark was taking everything: my daughter, my business, my legacy. He made a show of handing out new employee handbooks full of new rules. His cousin stood up straighter. The rest of the staff glanced at me, unsure. I said nothing. I just looked at Olivia and nodded. She wouldn't meet my eyes. After the meeting, I stepped outside and sat on the curb. The festival was ending, the sun going down behind the church steeple. Kids laughed. Fireworks popped in the distance. I felt old, tired, more alone than ever. Marta found me there. She sat down and handed me a warm cinnamon roll. "He can't run this place without you, Ray. Everyone knows it." I wanted to believe her, but the truth was clear. Mark held the keys now. Legally, financially, emotionally, he could do what he wanted. I could feel something inside me breaking. The weeks that followed were worse. Mark started modernizing everything. New menu boards, new vendors, even a new delivery van with his face on it. He cut corners to save money, buying cheap ingredients, serving yesterday's bread, laying off anyone who questioned him. The quality dropped. The reviews got worse. I watched customers leave. Some told me directly, others just stopped coming. The soul was going out of the place. I saw it in Olivia, too. Her smile faded, her posture slumped. She barely spoke to me, barely came home some nights. Mark's control over her tightened with every passing day. But I kept my promise. I watched, I waited. I kept my notebook, jotting down every shady invoice, every late-night delivery, every new consultant Mark brought in for a cash payment. One night, Olivia showed up at my door after closing. She was pale, her hands shaking. She wouldn't come in at first, just stood on the porch. "I can't do this anymore, Dad," she whispered. "He's got me signing papers I don't understand. He says if I don't go along, he'll—" She stopped, biting her lip. I put my arm around her. For a long moment, we just stood there. "You're not alone, Liv. I've got you. We'll fix this. But we have to be smart." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "He's trying to get everything in his name. He told me I'm just holding him back." My heart broke for her. My only child, lost in the mess I let happen. But that night, something hardened inside me. Mark wanted a war. I was ready to give him one. We started planning in secret. Olivia agreed to keep copies of every document he gave her. She started forwarding emails, snapping photos of suspicious paperwork, and writing down everything Mark said when he thought no one was listening. I shared what I had, my notebook, the files I'd pulled from old records, a list of loyal customers and staff who still cared about us. I called my old friend Sam, the lawyer. He met us at his office after hours, heard the whole story, and started digging. He found more than I expected. Fake invoices, money funneled through shell companies, even a fraudulent loan taken out in the bakery's name with Olivia's forged signature. Sam said it would take time, but we could build a case. We'd need proof, dates, witnesses, records. We'd need to stay quiet. One wrong move and Mark would catch on. Meanwhile, at the bakery, Mark grew reckless. He started drinking at work, yelling at staff, forgetting orders, making scenes in front of customers. His cousin tried to cover for him, but word spread fast. People in town started talking, wondering what was really happening behind the bright banners and fake smiles. Ed and Marta helped where they could, quietly collecting old pay stubs, bank statements, copies of emails. Mrs. Patel wrote down everything she heard during her brief shifts. Even some regulars, loyal to me for years, offered to testify if it came to that. I kept up my act, tired, beaten, grateful to Mark for taking the weight off my shoulders. I let him think I was finished. But every night, in my quiet house, I spread out the evidence, piecing together the story of how he was stealing my life one signature at a time. If you think that was the end of it, you don't know me at all. Winter came early that year. The cold seeped into the bakery's corners, making the ovens work overtime. Customers grew thinner, and Mark's temper grew shorter. I saw him snapping at Olivia more, his words sharp and cruel behind closed doors. She stopped coming home some nights. I knew where she was, Mark's apartment, alone, trapped in a marriage I could barely recognize anymore. But I wasn't done watching, nor was I done planning. One evening after closing, I stayed late. going over old receipts and bank statements I'd managed to pull without Mark knowing. I spotted something strange. A payment marked consulting fees sent to a company I'd never heard of. When I Googled it, the address was a mailbox service on the far side of town. No real office, just a shell. That was the kind of move only someone trying to hide something would make. The next day, I asked Olivia to meet me at the cafe down the street. She looked exhausted, but she came. I slid a folder across the table filled with photocopies of invoices, bank transfers, and contracts. She skimmed them quickly, eyes widening. This is fraud," she whispered. "Yes, and we have to stop it. We need to gather more proof, record conversations, get witness statements. We need to be ready for a fight." Her hands trembled. "I'm scared, Dad." I took her hand. "Me too, but fear doesn't get to win. Not this time." That night, I set up a small recorder in my office. The bakery was quiet after closing. Mark thought he was alone, but I had him on tape, confessing to shady deals, name-dropping investors who didn't exist, and laughing about how easy it was to fool everyone. I shared the recordings with Sam. He said they were gold. Meanwhile, I reconnected with a few old customers who had drifted away. Their loyalty to me was stronger than ever. They started spreading word. This wasn't just a business dispute. It was a fight for the soul of the bakery. Mark's arrogance grew. He started throwing wild parties at the bakery after hours, inviting city officials, investors, anyone who might boost his image. But the more he tried to shine, the more the cracks showed. One night, he showed up drunk, shouting at Olivia in front of everyone. She stormed out crying. That was the night I realized Olivia had finally reached her breaking point. I called her the next day. "You don't have to stay," I told her. "We'll figure this out together." She hesitated, then said, "I'm scared of what he'll do if I leave." That's when I made a decision. I told Sam we needed to move faster. We filed a complaint with the city's business bureau, submitting our evidence. We notified the bank of the fraudulent loan. We prepared to take Mark to court. But I knew that wasn't enough. I needed the community on our side. So I started telling our story, quietly at first. To the neighbors, the regulars, anyone who'd listen. I told them about Mark's greed, his lies, how he was destroying a family legacy. I shared the photos, the documents, the recordings. Word spread. The town rallied behind me. At the next city council meeting, dozens of customers and neighbors showed up to testify. They spoke of the bakery's golden years under my care, of the sharp decline since Mark took over. They handed over evidence, demanded action. Mark showed up, drunk and defiant. He tried to deny everything, called us liars, but no one believed him. The council froze his access to the business accounts, launched an official investigation. For the first time in months, I felt hope. Olivia came back home. We started fixing the bakery, rebuilding trust, repairing the ovens, retraining the staff. Slowly, the customers returned. The smell of fresh bread filled the air again. But the real victory came months later. The court ruled the ownership documents Mark had forced Olivia to sign were invalid, signed under pressure, with forged signatures. Mark was forced to surrender his claim. The bakery belonged to me and Olivia again. Mark's name was ruined in the community. Investors pulled out. His cousin quit and left town. Olivia and I stood behind the counter one busy morning, watching the line of smiling faces. I looked at her and whispered, "We did it." She smiled through tears. It wasn't just the bakery that was saved. It was our family. Even after the court's decision, the wounds ran deep. Olivia and I spent many late nights talking, not just about the bakery, but about trust, betrayal, and what family really meant. She told me how Mark had twisted her mind, made her doubt herself, convinced her that leaving me behind was the only way forward. I listened, holding her hand, reminding her that no matter what happened, we were stronger together. The bakery's reopening day was quiet but meaningful. We didn't throw a big party or send out fancy invites. Instead, we opened the doors early, baked extra loaves, and waited for the first customers. One by one, familiar faces walked in, greeted us warmly, and bought their favorite breads like nothing had changed. That's when I realized something. This place wasn't just about money or ownership. It was about community, about roots, about history. I went back through my old recipe book, the one Mark had thrown away, and started baking my grandmother's original sourdough again. The smell brought people back, old friends, new customers, even some curious former fans of Mark's flashy changes. Olivia started helping more. She learned the old recipes, talked to customers, and began to smile genuinely again. Watching her reclaim a piece of herself felt like the sweetest revenge of all. But I didn't stop there. Mark's betrayal had taught me that trust can be fragile. I vowed to build something unbreakable, not just a business, but a family. I reached out to Marta, Ed, Mrs. Patel, and the others. We formed a small advisory group to help run the bakery together, sharing decisions and responsibilities. It wasn't easy at first. Old wounds and past mistakes lingered. But we worked through them, one day at a time. One afternoon, Olivia and I sat on the bakery's back porch, watching the sun dip low over the rooftops. "I'm scared this could all happen again," she admitted. I squeezed her hand. "It won't, because now we're not just us, we're all of us. This bakery belongs to everyone who loves it." She leaned her head on my shoulder. That's when I knew the fight had changed. It was no longer about revenge or ownership. It was about healing, rebuilding, and moving forward. But let me be clear, that healing didn't come easy. It was born from the ashes of betrayal and the hard lessons of trust lost. And as for Mark, he's gone from our lives completely, not by accident, but by design. I made sure of that. The days turned into months. The bakery slowly regained its warmth, not just from ovens, but from the people who walked through its doors. The laughter of children, the chatter of neighbors, the clinking of coffee cups, it all came back. Each familiar face was a small victory. But some nights, when the shop was dark and silent, I still felt the weight of what had happened. The quiet betrayal, the years lost, the daughter who nearly disappeared under the shadow of a man I once trusted. I began writing again, not recipes this time, but letters. Letters to Olivia, to my late wife, to myself. Words I couldn't say aloud, feelings I couldn't otherwise release. They helped me breathe, helped me hold on to hope. Olivia started hosting baking classes on weekends. Kids from the neighborhood gathered around her, learning to knead dough and shape rolls. She smiled when she taught, and I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time: pride. One chilly morning, Marta brought me a small envelope. Inside was a note from Mark's cousin, the one he'd hired to run the place. He'd left town quietly, but the note said something that made me smile. "He never deserved this place. You did." It wasn't just about winning the business. It was about reclaiming respect, honor, legacy. I called Olivia into the back room that day. "We should do something," I said. "For the bakery, for us, a way to thank everyone who stood by us." She nodded, eyes bright. Together, we planned a small festival, inviting the whole town to celebrate the bakery's 50th anniversary and its new chapter. We promised fresh bread, music, stories, and the warmth of community. The day came, cold but clear. The bakery overflowed with people, old friends, new faces, children chasing each other between tables. I stood behind the counter, handing out loaves and smiles. Olivia told stories about the recipes, about her childhood, about the fight we'd been through. When she looked at me, I saw gratitude, love, and strength. All the things Mark had tried to take away and failed. Later that evening, as the festival wound down, I stepped outside. The street was quiet, the smell of baking bread still in the air. I looked up at the stars and whispered a promise, to never let greed or betrayal dim this light again. Because this bakery isn't just a building or a business. It's a family, a legacy, a testament to what can survive even the darkest storms. And as for my son-in-law, he's just a memory now, one I won't waste another breath on. In the quiet moments between baking and serving, I found myself thinking more about trust, how fragile it can be, how easily it can shatter under pressure, but also how powerful it can become when rebuilt, piece by piece, with care and patience. Olivia and I spent many evenings talking about the future, not just of the bakery, but of our family. We dreamed about passing the business down someday, not just as a moneymaker, but as a home for generations to come. We talked about the lessons we'd learned, the wounds that still needed healing, and the strength it took to keep moving forward. One afternoon, I walked through the old neighborhood where I'd grown up. The buildings had changed, some businesses closed, new faces in the windows, but the bakery stood proud, its sign shining under the winter sun. A young man I'd never met before approached me. "Mr. Ellis, my grandma used to come here when she was a girl. She said you were the heart of this place." I smiled. I just did my best. He nodded. "It's good to see it's still here. It means a lot." That moment stayed with me. It wasn't just about me, or even Olivia. It was about community, roots, and the stories that bind us all. Sometimes, when the shop was empty and the world outside was silent, I'd pull out that battered recipe book. My grandmother's handwriting faded but still clear. I'd bake alone, just to remember where it all began. Mark's shadow still lingered sometimes, in the edges of my thoughts in the quiet corners of the bakery, but it was no longer a weight. It was a reminder of how far we'd come, of what we'd fought for, and of the strength that comes from standing your ground. And as the seasons changed, I felt a peace, not from forgiveness or forgetting, but from knowing I'd fought for what was mine, for my family, and for the legacy that would outlast us all. There were nights when I still lay awake, haunted not by what Mark had done, but by what might have been if I'd acted sooner. Regret is a quiet companion, always there, whispering what-ifs and might-have-beens. But regret alone doesn't fix broken trust or stolen years. Action does. And I chose action. I started volunteering at the local community center, teaching baking to teenagers, sharing not just recipes, but stories of perseverance, family, and the taste of standing back up after being knocked down. The kids listened, some skeptical at first, but soon captivated by the history behind each loaf, the care in every need. Olivia joined me sometimes, her laughter filling the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Seeing her find joy again was worth every sleepless night I'd spent fighting. Word spread, and the bakery became more than a place to buy bread. It became a hub, a gathering spot, a beacon for those who believed in second chances and quiet strength. One day a letter arrived, no return address, just a single sheet of paper, typed neatly. "I lost everything because of you," it read, "but this isn't over." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. The past would always knock, but I no longer had to answer. Instead, I focused on what mattered: the warm smell of fresh bread, the smiles of customers, the steady rhythm of ovens humming in the early morning. Ellis & Son was back, and this time nothing would take it from us. The letter haunted me for a few days, not because I feared Mark, but because it reminded me how fragile peace can be. Some wounds don't fully heal. They just settle quietly beneath the surface, waiting for a chance to reopen. But I refused to live in fear. Instead, I took the letter as a challenge, not from Mark, but from the past itself. I was older now, yes. Slower maybe, but not defeated. I doubled down on building something stronger, something that couldn't be broken by one man's greed or bitterness. That meant more than just baking bread. It meant rebuilding relationships. I reached out to old friends I'd neglected, neighbors I'd lost touch with, even former employees I'd let down in the chaos. Some were hesitant at first, unsure if I was the same man who'd once run the bakery with iron hands and soft heart. But over time, trust returned. I started hosting monthly community nights at the bakery. Free bread, stories, music, laughter. People from all walks of life came. Strangers became friends. The bakery's walls echoed with hope again. Olivia grew into her role as co-owner with a quiet confidence I hadn't seen before. She introduced new recipes inspired by family traditions from both sides of our heritage. Customers loved the fresh energy she brought. One chilly evening, as the last guests left and the ovens cooled, Olivia and I sat together by the window, watching snowflakes drift lazily to the street. "I never thought we'd get here," she said softly. "Neither did I admitted, "but here we are." She looked at me, eyes bright but tired. "Thank you for not giving up." I smiled. It wasn't just me. It was all of us. The bakery wasn't just a business anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, of the power of family and community to overcome even the deepest betrayals. Sometimes I catch myself looking at the old sign above the door, the faded letters, the chipped paint, and I think about everything that's been lost and found here, about the battles fought behind these walls, the tears shed, the hands that worked this dough. And I know, without a doubt, that no matter what comes next, Ellis and Son will stand strong. Because it's more than flour and water. It's love baked into every loaf. Winter melted into spring, and with it came new life, not just in the world outside, but inside the bakery too. The air grew warmer, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and fresh baked bread. Customers returned with renewed smiles, families gathering in the shop to share stories and laughter. Olivia and I began planning for the future, thinking about expanding the bakery's reach without losing its heart. We talked about teaching more baking classes, hosting events, and even starting a small scholarship fund for local kids interested in culinary arts. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a local charity. They wanted to partner with us, to help provide meals for families in need. It was a sign that our hard work was paying off, that the bakery was becoming more than just a business, but a true community cornerstone. But even in the brightest moments, I never forgot the storm we had weathered, the betrayal that nearly broke us. Mark's name rarely crossed my mind anymore, but when it did, it reminded me how far we'd come. I learned that true strength isn't just about fighting back. It's about rising after the fall, about forgiving, not for their sake, but for your own peace. Yet forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. I kept every piece of evidence, every letter, every memory of those dark days. They were a part of my story, as painful as they were important. One evening, as I locked up the bakery, Olivia stopped me. "Dad, come see this." She led me to the window where a small group of kids were gathered, trying to reach the fresh bread on the display shelf. They laughed, their faces glowing in the fading light. "It's funny," she said softly. "No matter what happens, there's always hope, always a chance to start over." I looked at those kids and smiled. I thought about my own childhood, about the lessons my father taught me, about the legacy I wanted to leave behind. This bakery, this family, this community, they were my redemption. And I would protect them no matter what. The weeks after that night were some of the most peaceful I'd experienced in years. The bakery hummed with life. The ovens were busy from dawn till dusk, the shelves stocked with breads and pastries made with care and pride. Olivia and I worked side by side, our bond stronger than ever. Each morning, as I tied my apron and dusted flour onto the counters, I felt a renewed purpose. But peace, I learned, is a fragile thing. It doesn't come without cost. One afternoon, a man I hadn't seen in years walked through the door. His face was unfamiliar, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet intensity that made me wary. "Raymond Ellis?" he asked, voice calm but firm. I nodded. "That's me. How can I help you?" He introduced himself as a private investigator. Said he was hired by someone interested in reopening an old case, the one involving Mark. I stiffened. What kind of case? He leaned in slightly. Financial fraud, forgery, embezzlement, the works. I swallowed hard. Mark's already been dealt with. The courts ruled. He shook his head slowly. "That may be, but new evidence has come to light, things that weren't discovered before." For a moment, I felt like the past had come back to haunt me. But then I looked around the bakery, the life we'd rebuilt, and I steadied myself. "Tell me everything," I said. Over the next few hours, he laid out the story. Hidden accounts, offshore money transfers, false tax filings. Mark had been deeper in the game than anyone suspected. I felt a mix of anger and exhaustion wash over me, but also a strange relief. At least now the truth would be fully known. Olivia joined me later that evening. We sat by the fire, talking about what this meant for us. "We can't let it drag us down again," she said. "We fought too hard." I nodded. "We'll face whatever comes, together." The investigation stirred up old feelings, resentment, fear, but also determination. We prepared ourselves for the fight ahead, knowing that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought long after the headlines fade. Meanwhile, the bakery flourished. Our community nights grew in popularity, the classes filled with eager students. I saw hope in their eyes, a hope I hadn't felt for a long time. One day, a young woman approached me after a class. "Mr. Ellis, I just want to thank you. You've inspired me to chase my dreams." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I thought about all the years I'd spent fighting, all the pain and struggle, and suddenly it felt worth it. Because this was bigger than me, bigger than Mark. It was about legacy, about passing on something real. As spring blossomed into summer, I stood on the bakery's porch, watching the world go by. The sun warmed my face, the scent of fresh bread drifted through the air, and I felt a peace I'd long thought impossible. The past had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me, and as long as I had breath in my body, I would protect what mattered most. The summer brought with it a slow rhythm to the bakery's life. Mornings began earlier, the sun casting a golden glow over Maple Street, as neighbors gathered for their daily bread and conversation. Olivia and I worked alongside our loyal team, each loaf a testament to the hard journey we'd endured and the brighter path ahead. One afternoon, a letter arrived, not from a lawyer or investigator this time, but from the city's mayor. It was an invitation to speak at the annual Community Awards, recognizing businesses that had made a meaningful impact. I glanced at Olivia, whose eyes shone with quiet pride. "Looks like our story has touched more people than we realized," she said softly. The night of the awards ceremony, I stood before a crowd of familiar faces, friends, customers, neighbors. I spoke not of Mark or betrayal, but of resilience, community, and the power of standing together. My voice was steady, carrying the weight of every lesson learned. Afterward, many came forward to thank me. Some shared their own stories of struggle and triumph, reminding me that the bakery was more than just a building. It was a gathering place for hope. Back at the shop, life settled into a comforting routine. Olivia introduced seasonal breads inspired by our family recipes, blending old traditions with new flavors. The laughter of children in the baking classes echoed through the rooms, filling the space with warmth. Yet, beneath the surface, the memories of past wounds lingered. There were moments when I caught myself flinching at a raised voice or a sharp glance. The scars left by Mark's betrayal were invisible but present. One evening as I closed up, Olivia approached me. "Dad, have you thought about taking a break? Traveling? Seeing the world beyond this town?" I smiled. "Maybe one day, but right now, this bakery is my world." She squeezed my hand. "I'm glad." As summer faded into fall, the bakery hosted its first annual Harvest Festival. The streets filled with music, food stalls, and the scent of fresh apples and cinnamon. Families gathered to celebrate the season and the community that had grown stronger through hardship. Watching the festivities, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the people who had stood by me, for the family who had weathered storms, and for the bakery that had become a symbol of perseverance. Late that night, as the last guests departed and the lights dimmed, I sat by the window, reflecting on the journey. The fight against Mark had tested me in ways I never expected, but it had also revealed the depths of strength and love within. I knew there would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and struggle, but I was ready, because I wasn't alone anymore. Olivia was by my side. Our community was with us, and the legacy of Ellis and Son was secure. I closed my eyes and whispered a promise: to keep baking, to keep fighting, and to keep nurturing the family and community that had given me so much. No matter what came next, I was ready. The bakery's rhythm became a heartbeat in the neighborhood, steady and strong. Every morning, as the first light spilled across Maple Street, the doors of Ellis and Son swung open, welcoming familiar faces and new ones alike. Olivia's laughter mingled with the clatter of trays and the scent of baking bread, weaving a tapestry of life that was once nearly torn apart, but now stronger than ever. We began inviting local artisans to sell their crafts alongside our breads. On weekends, the shop transformed into a vibrant market, filled with handmade pottery, fresh flowers, and the hum of friendly conversation. It became a place not just for sustenance, but for connection, a sanctuary built on resilience. One afternoon, while rolling dough, Olivia shared a letter from a young woman who had attended one of our baking classes. She wrote about overcoming her own struggles, inspired by the story of the bakery and the strength she saw in both of us. Her words touched something deep within me, the realization that our fight had created ripples far beyond what I ever imagined. Despite the joy around me, I still carried the weight of those dark days. Sometimes, when the shop was quiet, memories surfaced, Mark's cold smile, the theft, the betrayal. But instead of letting them consume me, I folded them into my story, reminders of the battles that forged my spirit. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I walked to the back of the bakery where the old brick oven stood. I ran my hand along its rough surface, feeling the warmth still lingering from the day's baking. It was a symbol, steady, enduring, capable of weathering storms. Olivia joined me, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Dad, we've come a long way." I nodded. "Yes, we have, and there's still more to do." Together we planned a scholarship fund to help local youth pursue culinary careers. We wanted to give back, to nurture dreams just as ours had been nurtured years ago. The town embraced the initiative, and soon, Ellis & Son was more than a bakery. It was a beacon of hope and opportunity. Still, life was not without its challenges. Running a business meant facing tough decisions and occasional setbacks. But now, I faced them with a community behind me and a family that refused to break. One cold morning, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Ed, holding a worn photo album. "I found this while cleaning out my attic," he said, smiling softly. "Thought you'd want it." We spent the afternoon flipping through old pictures, black and white snapshots of the bakery's early days, faded memories of my wife's warm smile, and the faces of those who had built this place alongside me. It was a reminder of where we came from and the legacy we carried forward. As night fell and the streets grew quiet, I felt a profound sense of peace. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was a man rebuilt, through love, loss, and unwavering determination. Ellis & Son was alive, thriving, and ready for whatever the future held. And I was ready too. The months rolled on, each one stitching more strength into the fabric of our lives. The bakery thrived, but more importantly, so did the bonds we'd rebuilt, between Olivia and me, among the staff, and within the community that had rallied around us when it mattered most. One chilly evening, after closing, Olivia and I sat in the empty shop, the scent of cinnamon and fresh bread still lingering. She looked at me with a softness that made my chest ache. "Dad," she said quietly, "I've been thinking about the future, about what we want this bakery to be." I smiled, intrigued. She continued, "I want us to teach more than just baking. I want to share the story, our story. The story of how a family almost lost everything but fought back. Maybe we can inspire others." Her words filled me with pride. That's exactly what this had become. A story of survival, resilience, and hope. We started planning workshops, not just for baking but for entrepreneurship, trust, and community building. We invited speakers, shared resources, and opened our doors wider than ever before. The bakery became a beacon, drawing people not just for food but for connection. One day, as I was arranging fresh pastries, a familiar face appeared, an old friend from my youth, someone I hadn't seen in decades. He smiled warmly. "Raymond Ellis, still the heart of this town, I see." We reminisced about days long past, the struggles, the joys, the dreams that had carried us through. That meeting reminded me that life's journey is never solitary. We're shaped by those who walk beside us, by those who believe in us, even when we falter. As autumn painted the town in gold and red, Olivia and I hosted the second annual Harvest Festival. It was bigger, warmer, filled with music, stories, and the unmistakable aroma of fresh bread. Standing there, surrounded by laughter and love, I felt the weight of the past lift from my shoulders. Mark's shadow no longer loomed. The bakery, our family, our community, they were stronger than ever. And as the stars twinkled overhead, I whispered a final promise: to keep baking, to keep fighting, and to keep believing. Because sometimes the sweetest victories come after the longest battles. Winter crept back in slowly that year, wrapping the town in quiet blankets of snow and frost. The bakery glowed like a warm beacon against the cold, its windows fogged with the breath of busy hands kneading dough and hearts rebuilding trust. Even the oldest customers, who had witnessed decades of change, stopped by to say how much the place felt alive again. Olivia and I found ourselves growing closer than ever. The trials we'd faced forged a bond that nothing could break. We shared quiet mornings sipping coffee before the rush, whispered hopes for the future during late nights by the oven's warmth, and laughed over small triumphs that once would have seemed impossible. One evening, as we closed the bakery, Olivia pulled a faded photograph from a drawer. It was of my wife, her smile radiant, standing in front of the bakery during its opening years. "I miss her," Olivia said softly, eyes glistening. "I do too," I replied, my voice thick. "But she's still here, in every loaf, every corner, every story this place holds." We sat together in silence, the past folding gently around us. The challenges weren't over, of course. Running a business meant endless decisions, unexpected problems, and moments of doubt. But with each hurdle, I felt stronger. Not because I was alone, but because we were together, family, friends, community. Spring returned with its promise of renewal. The cherry trees outside the bakery burst into bloom, petals swirling in the breeze like soft pink snow. That season, we launched a new program to help local families struggling to make ends meet. We donated bread, taught free baking classes, and opened our doors wider than ever before. One afternoon, as I handed a warm loaf to a mother and her child, I realized something profound. The bakery had become more than a business. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of never giving up. Years ago, I never imagined I'd stand here again, whole and proud. But here I was, living proof that even the deepest wounds can heal, and that legacy isn't just about what you build, it's about what you fight to protect. And as the sun set over Maple Street, casting golden light through the bakery windows, I knew this was only the beginning. Because the story of Ellis and Son was far from over. The seasons cycled gently, and with each passing year, Ellis and Son became a cornerstone of our town, not just for its bread, but for the spirit it embodied. I watched as children grew up in our baking classes, as friendships blossomed over shared loaves and stories, and as a community strengthened itself around resilience and hope. Olivia and I worked tirelessly, but not without joy. We celebrated small victories, perfect batches of sourdough, new recipes that became favorites, the smiles of returning customers. Each day was a gift, each moment a chance to build something lasting. Yet amid the success, I often found myself reflecting on the journey, the betrayal that nearly tore us apart, the fight to reclaim what was ours, and the lessons learned along the way. I realized that revenge, while satisfying in its moment, was only part of the story. The true victory was in the rebuilding, in the love that carried us through, the community that stood with us, and the legacy that would endure long after I was gone. One chilly autumn evening, as we closed the bakery and watched the last leaves fall, Olivia turned to me and said, "Dad, this place is more than just a bakery now. It's a home, a family." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the ovens. "Yes, it is. And as long as we hold on to that, no one can ever take it from us again." We locked the doors behind us, stepping into the cool night air. The stars twinkled overhead, silent witnesses to our journey, a journey marked by pain, perseverance, and ultimately, hope. And as we walked home together, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them side by side, stronger than ever before. Because some stories aren't just about revenge. They're about rising, healing, and forging a future worth fighting for. The years wore on, and with them came changes, both expected and surprising. The bakery remained a constant in the shifting tides of life, its ovens glowing bright through storms and sunny days alike. Olivia and I watched as the shop became more than a business. It became a living legacy. We welcomed new faces, young bakers eager to learn, families searching for comfort, friends reconnecting over shared memories. Each person added a thread to the tapestry we were weaving, a story of resilience and renewal. One afternoon, as I dusted flour from my hands, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. It was Sam, my old lawyer and steadfast ally through the darkest times. "Raymond," he said with a grin, "I come bearing good news." We sat together in the back office, the afternoon light casting long shadows. He told me that the final investigations into Mark's misdeeds had concluded. Justice, slow but certain, had been served. A wave of relief washed over me, tempered by the memory of battles fought and sacrifices made. "I'm glad it's over," I said quietly. "But more than that, I'm grateful for the future we've built." Sam nodded. "You fought with honor, and you've earned this peace." That evening, Olivia and I celebrated quietly. No grand gestures, just the warmth of family and the steady rhythm of our lives. But peace, I knew, was not a destination. It was a journey, one we would continue walking together, with hope in our hearts and flour on our hands. As night fell and the stars took their places, I looked out over Maple Street and whispered a vow to keep fighting for what mattered, to nurture the legacy we'd reclaimed, and to never forget the lessons the past had taught me. Because in the end, it's not revenge that defines us. It's the strength to rise again. The months that followed brought a quiet sense of fulfillment. The bakery hummed with life, filled with the chatter of customers and the soft thud of dough being kneaded. Olivia and I had found a rhythm, a balance between honoring the past and embracing the future. One crisp morning, as the first light touched the rooftops, I stood outside the shop, watching the neighborhood wake up. The familiar faces, the laughter of children, the smell of freshly baked bread. It was a symphony of life that I had fought to preserve. Inside, Olivia was preparing for another baking class. She looked over at me, her eyes bright with determination and hope. "Dad, do you remember when this all started?" "How far we've come." I smiled, feeling the weight of those memories. "Every day, and I'm proud of what we've built." She nodded. "Me too." That evening, after closing, we sat by the fire, reflecting on the journey, the betrayals, the fights, the victories. We talked about the future, the legacy we wanted to leave, and the family we wanted to be. It wasn't just about bread anymore. It was about resilience, love, and the power of never giving up. As the stars shone overhead, I whispered a final promise: to protect what mattered, to cherish every moment, and to keep baking hope into every loaf. Because some stories aren't just about revenge. They're about rising stronger than before. Time passed, and with it came changes I never could have imagined. The bakery, once a battleground, had transformed into a sanctuary, not just for bread, but for healing. Olivia and I watched as the community embraced us, as new friendships blossomed, and as our family grew stronger in ways beyond blood. One rainy afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just a single sheet of paper folded carefully inside the envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it. The words were simple but sharp, a warning that old wounds could still bleed, that some battles might not be over. I folded the letter back up and placed it on the table, feeling a familiar stir of unease. But alongside it came something new, a fierce determination to protect everything I'd fought so hard to reclaim. I shared the letter with Olivia that night. She looked at me with steady eyes. "We've come this far. We won't let fear take us backward." Together we decided not to hide or retreat. Instead, we reached out to our community, to friends and neighbors who had stood by us. We fortified our bonds, prepared quietly but firmly to face whatever might come. The bakery flourished despite the shadows. Each loaf of bread baked was a testament to our resilience, each smile a victory against the past. And as the seasons turned, I realized that true revenge wasn't in destruction. It was in rebuilding, in love, in lasting strength. Because in the end, the sweetest victory is the life you choose to live afterward. The letter sat on my desk for days, untouched but never forgotten. Each time I glanced at it, the cold weight of its words stirred something deep inside me, something I thought I had buried long ago. I knew the fight wasn't over, not truly. But this time, I wouldn't rush. I'd watch, wait, and strike when the moment was right. I started by digging deeper, quietly checking the bakery's records, following the money trails Mark had left behind. What I found was worse than I imagined. Hidden accounts, secret deals, and a tangled web of lies that stretched far beyond what we'd uncovered before. But I wasn't just uncovering evidence. I was preparing my move. With Olivia's help, I contacted old allies, the loyal staff, the friends who'd stood by me through thick and thin. We formed a quiet coalition, gathering proof and testimony, waiting for the perfect moment to expose everything. Then came the night. Mark thought he was untouchable, flaunting his success, laughing at those who dared oppose him. But I had a surprise. I arranged a town meeting under the guise of a community event. Everyone important showed up. Neighbors, officials, even some of Mark's investors. When the time came, I stood before them with the evidence laid bare. Forged documents, falsified contracts, illegal transfers. The room fell silent as I told the story, not just of theft, but of betrayal, greed, and the destruction of a family legacy. Mark's confident facade cracked. He stammered, tried to deny it, but the proof was undeniable. Justice was swift. Authorities took over, and Mark faced consequences that echoed far beyond his failed schemes. As the crowd dispersed, Olivia hugged me tight. "You did it," she whispered. I smiled, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. But the real victory wasn't in Mark's downfall. It was in reclaiming our story, our dignity, and our future. Ellis & Son stood stronger than ever, not just a bakery, but a symbol of what true strength looks like. And as I looked out over the town that had given me so much, I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning of a legacy that would last forever. The town meeting had changed everything. For weeks afterward, whispers of Mark's downfall echoed through the streets. Some expressed shock, others relief, but all of them now saw the bakery and our family in a new light. I could finally breathe again, but I knew the scars wouldn't vanish overnight. Trust, once broken, takes time to mend. Yet, as autumn gave way to winter, something unexpected happened. One evening, Olivia found a package on our doorstep. Inside was an old, dusty ledger, one that had gone missing years ago during Mark's reign. Its pages revealed secret deals, hidden debts, and names of people involved in the scheme. Names I hadn't expected. It was the missing piece, the proof that what we uncovered before was just the surface. Armed with this, we returned to the authorities. This time, the investigation widened, reaching farther than anyone had anticipated. The people who thought they could hide behind Mark's lies were exposed one by one. They lost more than money. They lost respect, standing, and influence. Through it all, Olivia stood by my side, stronger and braver than ever. One snowy night, as we closed the bakery and looked out over the quiet town, she turned to me. "We're not just survivors," she said softly. "We're warriors." I smiled, thinking back to the early days, when hope seemed fragile and betrayal sharp. Now, it was our story that gave hope to others. And as the ovens cooled and the stars shone bright, I knew this fight had forged more than just a bakery. It had forged a legacy, unyielding, unbreakable, and forever ours. The cold wind bit through the streets as winter deepened. Snow lay thick on the rooftops, muffling the world in silence, except for the steady warmth inside Ellis & Son. The ovens glowed like the heart of the place itself, strong, enduring. Olivia and I sat by the fire one evening, the ledger spread between us. Each page told a story of deception deeper and darker than I'd imagined. It wasn't just Mark anymore. Others had been complicit, hiding behind the shadows he left. This was bigger than a family feud. This was a conspiracy. I felt the weight of it settle over me. not with fear, but with a cold clarity. "We need to finish this," I said quietly. Olivia nodded, her eyes fierce with determination. We reached out to Sam again. The law was slow but thorough. After a month of investigations, the truth emerged. One by one, the players in the scheme were brought to light, including those he trusted most. The town watched, captivated and horrified, as truth unfolded. But the best part wasn't the justice served in courts or the headlines that followed. It was what came next. With the last of the conspirators exposed and the bakery's name cleared, Olivia and I made a decision. We would honor the past, not by dwelling on betrayal, but by building a future filled with hope. We launched a foundation in my wife's name to support local families, to fund education and mentorship, to give back what greed had tried to take. The community rallied around us, stronger and more united than ever. And on a quiet morning, standing at the bakery's door, watching the sun rise over Maple Street, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of having fought, endured, and emerged whole. Because this story, our story, is not just about revenge. It's about rising, stronger than before. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of the story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching to the end.